G'day, Stephen Frost here from Go Blue. Today's video is on new research from the Changing Market Foundation called Dirty Fashion, Spotlight on China, which argues that the Chinese collaboration for sustainable development of viscose will not be able to deliver on its promise. But before diving in and assessing that claim, it's worth examining some of the background that brought us to the release of this current statement, which is the latest in a line of 6 publications on viscose from Changing Market since mid-2017. First, a question. Is viscose really better for the environment? It has the potential to be, because it's a semi-synthetic fibre made from trees. As a result, it has become increasingly popular in the fashion industry, which we all know is under pressure to mitigate risk associated with fibres derived from raw materials such as petroleum. But just because it's a plant-based fibre doesn't mean it should be an automatic green choice. In fact, most viscose on the market today is produced using a highly chemical-intensive process. While consumers are becoming aware of the problems associated with oil-based synthetics like polyester and the negative impacts of growing cotton on an industrial scale, far fewer know about the environmental and human health impacts caused by the rapidly expanding viscose industry. The Changing Markets Foundation aims to tackle that low awareness. What is the Changing Markets Foundation? Well, it works with NGOs, other foundations and research organisations to shift market share away from unsustainable products and companies and towards environmentally and socially beneficial solutions. And it is not just focused on viscose. It has been active in all sorts of interesting areas, including food fortification, infant milk products, and pharmaceutical pollution, to name a few. Changing Market's first report on viscose in June 2017 was called Dirty Fashion: How Pollution in the Global Textile Supply Chain is Making Viscose Toxic, and investigated viscose production in 3 countries: China, India, and Indonesia. As this graphic shows, it focused on 5 viscose producers supplying 15 well-known fashion brands. This first report showed clear evidence viscose manufacturers were contaminating local lakes and waterways by dumping untreated wastewater, which was having a devastating impact on local people's quality of life, including, possibly, a growing incidence of cancer, negative impacts on family and particularly children's health, and the destruction of traditional livelihoods, with local fishermen particularly badly impacted. The report noted that while H&M and Inditex, which is Zara's parent company, were among the most transparent when it came to disclosing viscose supplier relationships, most brands had no viscose-specific policies in place, and a number refused even to reveal supplier names. Given the concentration of viscose production, the report concluded the purchasing power of major brands could play a substantial role in putting pressure on producers to clean up their act. 8 months after Dirty Fashion, in February 2018, Changing Markets published its second report, Dirty Fashion Revisited: Spotlight on a Polluting Viscose Giant. This was an in-depth look at just one of the companies examined in the first report, the Aditya Birla Group, which is a global corporation with market value of $50 billion and headquartered in Mumbai, India. The report summarised findings from on-the-ground investigations at 2 Aditya Birla Group factories in India and Indonesia. The report alleged a raft of problems, ranging from contaminated water and air pollution to workplace deaths, 1 per month, and serious health issues including cancer, tuberculosis, reproductive problems, birth defects, and stomach disorders. As a consequence, Spotlight on a Polluting Viscose Giant received widespread media coverage, of which this independent article was fairly typical. Despite the accusatory headline, the article did note further down that the Aditya Birla Group, the Indian conglomerate which ultimately owns the plant, denies that the problems were linked to its operations. Also in February, Changing Markets released its Roadmap towards Responsible Viscose and Modal Fibre Manufacturing. This 9-page document provided guidance to brands and retailers which had engaged with the Foundation following the publication of the original Dirty Fashion report. In May, the Foundation released its third viscose-related report, The False Promise of Certification: How Certification is Hindering Sustainability in the Textiles, Palm Oil and Fisheries Industries. Although not specifically targeting viscose production, it did highlight one initiative, Canopy, which works with the forest industry's biggest customers and their suppliers to develop business solutions to protect last frontier forests. In other words, forests that should not be used as the raw material for viscose, but often are. Around 30% of viscose that goes into clothing comes from pulp logged from endangered and ancient forests. About this, the report noted Canopy only covered the sourcing of wood pulp, but not the use of chemicals in the manufacturing of viscose, which can give companies that are continuing to pollute the environment an unjustified green glow, which is then often used as a selling point with customers. In July, the Foundation released Dirty Fashion, On Track for Transformation, the third in the Dirty Fashion series. This assessed where global apparel companies and viscose manufacturers stood in the transition towards responsibly produced viscose, 1 year after the original report. At the time of publication, Inditex, ASOS, Marks & Spencer, H&M, Tesco, Esprit, and C&A had all signed on to the roadmap, which I mentioned earlier, and had started engaging with their suppliers, calling on them to commit to closed-loop manufacturing by 2023 to 2025. Next signed later, bringing to 8 the number of brands committed to cleaning up their viscose supply chains. In this report, Changing Markets also ranked brands into 4 categories: frontrunners, could do better, trailing behind, and red zone. It's worth noting that the 8 viscose roadmap signatories were all in the frontrunner category. From the very first report, it was clear Asia was the main producer of viscose. The third report, On Track for Transformation, highlighted this. Not only was most production in Asia, with less than 13% outside the region, but slightly more than 2/3 of all production was in China. Of the top 10 manufacturers, 80% were Chinese, with only Austria's Lenzing and India's Aditya Birla standing apart. Which brings us to the 4th and to date final report in the Dirty Fashion series, released in late November. Dirty Fashion, Spotlight on China. This report focuses on the so-called Collaboration for Sustainable Development of Viscose, or CV for short, launched by 10 leading Chinese viscose producers in March 2018, representing over 50% of the world's viscose staple fibre production. Changing Markets Foundation is unimpressed. It states, however, far from driving meaningful transformation of the sector in line with best practices for responsible viscose production, this report shows that the CV roadmap fails to drive ambition among its members and gives Chinese producers the options to pick and choose between different standards. The report goes on to note that even though the Chinese government has strengthened enforcement of pollution regulations, the Chinese government and media have recorded multiple violations of national and local regulations and pollution incidents at sites operated by CV members. Changing Markets campaign advisor Erska Trunk was quoted as saying, "At a time when major fashion brands such as Next and Inditex are sending a clear message to their suppliers to commit to responsible production of viscose, it is hugely disappointing to see such shortcomings in the CV roadmap." Perhaps most damning is the conclusion, which states, in part, that brands and retailers should not consider membership of the CV initiative and commitment to the CV roadmap as proof of good environmental performance and responsible production methods, unless the initiative undergoes significant reform in line with the following recommendations: higher ambition, clarity and transparency, incentive for continuous improvement, and, for ZDHC specifically, guidelines for measuring and recording performance in the viscose manufacturing process. Can Chinese producers clean up their act? The answer to that question lies, to some extent, on their own commitment and the Chinese government's willingness and ability to enforce its own laws. But it will also depend on the will of fashion brands and retailers. Thank you for listening. See you next time.